There is an ancient idea, repeated across many cultures and traditions, that evening reflections possess a special power to influence our inner state. Everything we place into our consciousness during the last minutes or hours before sleep forms a kind of informational imprint that continues to work within us even when we are fully relaxed and unaware of what is happening. Thought processes do not shut down. On the contrary, at night the brain gains the opportunity to process information without distractions, structure experiences, connect seemingly unrelated ideas, search for solutions, and build new neural connections. This naturally raises an important question. What should we do in the evening so that these processes begin working for us, for our growth, for the realization of our dreams? How can we direct the brain's nighttime activity so that it prepares us for the future we truly want? This topic drew the attention of John Grinder, one of the founders of neuro-linguistic programming and a researcher of human thinking, behavioral strategies, and mechanisms of exceptional achievement. In the 1970s, he set himself an intriguing task: to understand what unites Nobel Prize winners, people whose contributions to civilization were so significant that their discoveries became part of world history. Grinder studied biographies, observed thought patterns and habits, and searched for recurring. A difficult childhood forced them to adapt early and search for solutions where others gave up. The second characteristic turned out to be even more interesting. These people dreamed differently than most. Their images of the future were not vague wishes or idle fantasies. They had a specific structure and depth. They were so vivid that the brain began to perceive them as a reality toward which it needed to move. This phenomenon inspired Grinder to develop a technique that later became known as a view from the future and was refined into a precise psychological tool. The essence of this technique is based on the peculiarities of human imagination. We can create mental images in different ways. The first is associated representation. When you perceive the world from inside your own body, you see your hands, feel their position, sense your breathing, notice movements, and even register subtle tactile sensations. This is a state of full presence within the imagined situation. The second way is dissociated representation, when you observe yourself from the outside, as if watching a character in a movie. You see your body and actions, but you do not experience them physically. These two modes may seem similar, but in reality, they differ fundamentally. And this difference became the key to understanding the effectiveness of the technique. When a person imagines a situation from the inside, the brain activates so-called ideomotor responses. This is a real sign. For example, why athletes use mental rehearsal, mentally practicing movements, jumps, strikes, and complex combinations, and actually improve performance. Why actors mentally rehearse scenes and then play them with greater confidence. Why in neurology, patients recovering from strokes are asked to imagine moving a paralyzed limb. This accelerates recovery, helps rebuild neural pathways, stimulates blood flow, and forms new connections. However, there is an important limitation. This response arises only during associated representation. If a person sees themselves from the outside, in a dissociated format, The brain perceives the image as observation rather than lived experience. Ideomotor signals do not arise. There is no neural activation, no bodily response, no strengthening of the necessary neural connections. It was precisely this difference that caused attempts to introduce the technique into the training of Soviet athletes for the 1980 Olympic Games to fail. Athletes were advised to mentally train, but they were not taught how to imagine themselves correctly. Many observed themselves, as if in a movie, from the outside, and the method stopped working. The foundation of the view from the future technique is built on the sequential use of both modes of perception. First, a person creates a dissociated image. They imagine themselves in the future, several years ahead, already having achieved the desired level of life, goals, and inner state. They observe their life as if through the eyes of an outsider. How they look, what they do, where they live, what they own, what relationships they are in, how they allocate their... Then comes the key moment. The person seemingly flies into this image, moves inside the body of their future self, begins to look through their eyes, feel through their skin, and breathe their breath. At this moment, a deep connection with the desired reality occurs. This is similar to a test drive of a car. Only by sitting behind the wheel can you understand whether it is comfortable, whether it suits you, and whether it is easy to control. In the same way, you can feel your future, not as a beautiful picture, but as a living experience. It is precisely in this associated state that processes begin in the brain that fix the direction of movement. Emotional involvement arises, the body responds, and a sense of "this is mine, this fits me, this is how I want to live" is created. Then, while inside this image, the person takes another important step. They look from the future at their present self, as if at another person. From this position, they begin to ask, what did I do 5 years ago to end up here? What decisions did I make? What skills did I develop? Which habits did I abandon? What did I prioritize? This creates an energetically powerful link between the future and the present. The brain receives not just a goal, but a kind of route. And when this technique is practiced before sleep, it gains even greater potential. In the evening, melatonin, the hormone that prepares the body for sleep, begins to be actively produced. It slows physiological processes, lowers blood pressure and heart rate, relaxes muscles, and places the mind into a softer state. In this condition, vivid images are perceived more deeply, and imagination becomes especially active. The brain enters a mode of creative restructuring, in which it is easier to build new behavioral models. By practicing the technique in the evening, you allow your brain to work on your goals throughout the night. It analyzes, connects, structures, evaluates possible scenarios, and selects ideas that might never arise during ordinary waking hours. And in the morning, you wake up as a slightly different person, with a new perspective, a new sense of direction, and a new inner impulse to move forward. The effect of ideomotor representation is so powerful and so deeply impacts the human organism that it sometimes seems unbelievable. Imagine this. A person mentally lifts a dumbbell with their left arm every day without performing a single physical movement, and after a month, the left arm actually becomes noticeably stronger. This is not a metaphor or a figure of speech, but a real physiological effect. The reason is that the brain, regularly activating neural circuits associated with movement, sends microsignals along the same nerve pathways that would be engaged during actual muscle contraction. These microsignals do not lift real weight, but they strengthen neuromuscular connections, improve blood flow, and stimulate signal conductivity. Simply put, the brain begins to train the body even when the body remains completely still. This same principle is widely used in the rehabilitation of stroke patients. When a person loses the ability to move an arm, doctors often recommend at least mentally performing familiar movements, clenching a fist, raising the arm, making circular motions, touching objects. Ideomotor training is actively used by professionals in many fields. Athletes use it to refine complex elements when the body is tired or when physical training is limited. Actors use it to live into a role, feel the character's emotions, and mentally walk through a scene before performing it on stage. Musicians use it to rehearse complex passages in their mind, making physical execution easier. Thus, imagination becomes not merely a tool of fantasy, but a real training ground on which future mastery is created. But there is an important nuance. The ideomotor response is activated only when a person imagines action in an associated way, that is, from within, as if living it in real time with their own body. You see not yourself from the outside, but what you would see if you were performing the action in reality. The position of your hands, the movement of your fingers, the tension of your muscles. If you observe yourself as a movie viewer, the brain perceives this as watching another person and remains passive. No microsignals arise, no physiological activation occurs. The image remains merely a picture. This lack of understanding was the reason the attempt to implement ideomotor preparation in Soviet athletes before the 1980 Olympics failed. Athletes were instructed to mentally rehearse exercises, but were not taught to do so from within their own perspective. Many imagine themselves confident and successful, performing on stage from the viewpoint of a spectator, and as a result, the training effect was zero. The method did not work because its core principle was violated. The view from the future technique takes both forms of representation into account and is structured to use them in the correct sequence. This technique is especially effective in the evening, when the body naturally begins preparing for sleep. Around 9:30 p.m., melatonin levels increase, the hormone regulating the sleep-wake cycle. It slows physiological processes, relaxes muscles, lowers heart rate, softens breathing, and makes the brain more receptive to vivid mental images. This is the window when conscious control weakens and the subconscious becomes more accessible. If you perform the technique at this moment, your brain receives a powerful image of the goal, which it then processes throughout the night. It analyzes it, restructures internal patterns, searches for possible pathways, gathers inner resources, and connects ideas that were previously unrelated. Moreover, the brain begins to notice external opportunities. You start seeing things that previously escaped your attention. People, ideas, signals necessary for moving toward your goal. This works like a navigation system that knows the final destination and continuously corrects the trajectory, even when you are not consciously aware of it. The main thing is to keep your gaze on the goal. Do not look at your feet. Do not focus on obstacles. Do not fixate on difficulties. The brain will find a way to activate the right resources, engage the right decisions, and select the right steps. If you practice this technique at least several times a week, gradually, gently, but very deeply, your relationship with dreams, tasks, and yourself will begin to change. Clarity, inner calm, and confidence in your chosen direction will emerge. Try it, and you will notice how, when the brain receives a clear, emotionally rich reference point, it automatically filters information differently. It cuts away excess, reduces anxiety, and lowers internal noise. You begin to feel that your movement has direction, your thoughts have structure, and your actions have meaning. Even in moments when you are doing nothing deliberately, a quiet but powerful internal process continues, forming the necessary neural connections. In addition, the view from the future technique develops the ability to see yourself differently, not through doubt, limitations, or habitual frames, but through the lens of potential. You create a new version of yourself that gradually becomes familiar, natural, and real. And when this new internal version becomes vivid enough, the brain begins comparing it with the current one and searching for ways to shorten the distance. You feel new desires, new habits, and new decisions emerging, ones that previously never even occurred to you. This is inner transformation. And finally, as you develop the skill of looking at yourself from the future, you stop fearing big goals. They no longer feel vague or unattainable. Instead, they gain form, volume, and emotional density. You begin to feel them as something real, not distant, but achievable. And this feeling, calm, steady, and confident, becomes the most powerful driver that changes your actions, your decisions, and your life. When your future becomes part of your present, the path toward it has already begun. If this information resonated with you and you want to continue developing your thinking and inner strength, subscribe to the channel. Here, we are building the very future you dream of.